Hey guys, tonight we're heading back, way back, to the dusty cradle of civilization, where the Euphrates drifts lazily through the plains, and the most high-tech timekeeping device is a stick in the ground. You're in the city of one of ancient Sumer's crown jewels, and the year is, well, nobody's really keeping track yet, but let's say around 2500 BCE. It's early morning, though you're not exactly sure how early. There's no iPhone chirping at you. No clock radio humming, just the slow, golden spill of sunlight as it creeps across your mud brick wall. You don't check the time. You feel it, squinting at the light, guessing the hour by the length of your shadow on the clay. This is a world where time breathes gently, marked not by numbers but by nature. You can smell the damp earth still clinging to the night, and hear the distant splash of someone hauling up a water jar. Across the lane, a goat sneezes. It's going to be that kind of day. You stretch and rise from your reed mat, careful not to wake the snoring lump beside you, possibly your cousin. Or your cousin's goat. It's too early for labels. You pad outside, and the sky is just beginning to blush. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step out into the quiet lanes of dodging a wandering duck and a sleepy merchant setting up his clay pots. The city smells of last night's fires and this morning's fresh bread. Your first stop? A sunlit courtyard with a slightly crooked pole jammed into the dirt. It doesn't look like much, but to the Sumerians, this humble shadow maker is how the day begins. See, without clocks, calendars, or even the word hour, you and your neighbors rely on the sun and its faithful shadow games. That stick in the ground? It's your timepiece. When the shadow is long and slanted, it's early. When it's short and stubby, it's midday. When it stretches again toward the east, you better be wrapping things up. Of course, it's not perfect. Clouds are a menace, and on windy days, you're never quite sure if the stick is still vertical. Still, it's better than your uncle's gut feeling, which last week had you showing up to a feast 6 hours early. As you trudge toward the temple district, the path is busying with donkeys, traders, and bleary-eyed priests. The ziggurat looms above, tiered and dusty, watching over the city like a divine layer cake. At its base, a group of scribes huddle in the shade, scratching figures into clay tablets. These aren't just math nerds, they're timekeepers. They spent generations observing how shadows shift, how the sun arcs across the year, and how celestial patterns repeat. Mostly, you pause near the shadow stick again, gnomon. They'll eventually call it, and notice how its tip has moved since dawn. Not much, but enough to tell the bakers it's time to light their ovens and the farmers to lead oxen out to plow the fields. You've got chores, too, fetching water, maybe collecting barley, but for now, you indulge in the mesmerizing crawl of the shadow. It inches, nearly imperceptibly, like a lazy caterpillar tracking time. One of the scribes beckons you closer. He's old, with eyebrows like broom bristles and breath that smells faintly of fermented dates. He gestures to a crude drawing etched in the dirt, concentric circles, each labeled with wedge-like marks. This is your first sundial, or at least the seed of it. He explains how the sun's position could be divided, hypothetically, into smaller bits of day. It's all very theoretical, since no one agrees on how many bits there should be. Some say 6, others argue for 12, a few mavericks want 60. Historians still argue whether the Sumerians had a consistent concept of hours, or if they simply flowed through time like lazy riverweed. Still, it's fascinating. You kneel and trace the outermost circle with your finger. The scribe chuckles and hands you a stick, your own gnomon. You plant it in the dirt and watch as your shadow merges with the community's. One long thread in a collective loom of light. By mid-morning, the streets are fully awake. A fish seller yells something that might be a price or an insult, either way. You keep walking. The shadow is growing shorter now, leaning more directly beneath the stick. That means it's almost time for the midday meal, or at least, time to think about it. In this society, the exact hour is slippery. You eat when the shadow says you're hungry. There's a rhythm to this world: sunrise, shadow, task, midday, shadow, pause, sunset, shadow, retreat. You can't be early or late. Not really. You just are. Always in relation to the sun's progress. And for a fleeting moment, it feels freeing. But you also can't help but notice that the guy with the biggest shadow always seems to be the one giving orders. Coincidence? By now, the sun is higher, climbing toward its grand zenith with the slow assurance of a god who doesn't need to check his calendar. You follow its arc with a squint, shading your eyes with one hand as your feet crunch along the dry packed street. You're not alone. Others are doing the same, watching the sky like it owes them answers. Time, here in ancient Mesopotamia, is not a grid. It's not carved into predictable hours and minutes. It's a living thing, stretchy, moody, and occasionally late for its own appointments. But even before people had words like minute or appointment, they had the sun, and the sun was on time. More or less. You pass a group of children playing a game that looks suspiciously like tag. Though it involves more mud and fewer rules. They shriek with delight and don't seem to care one bit where the sun is or what it's doing. But a nearby elder does. He taps his foot, arms crossed, gaze locked on the angle of a shadow falling from a nearby column. You know that look. He's mentally calculating when to head to the granary. The truth is, humans have always needed to know what time it is. Not because they love schedules, but because they need to coordinate, planting, praying, baking, resting, before clocks, before bells, before smartphones buzzed you awake at 6:30 a.m. People had to learn to read the sky. And they got really good at it. You duck into a shaded alley for a moment, escaping the glare. A tiny breeze flutters past, bringing with it the warm scent of baked clay and something pungent that might be onions. Or sandals. Either way, it's comforting. Back out in the main square, you approach one of the city's larger sunstones, an intentionally smooth slab of pale limestone with a short bronze rod jutting up from the center. It's carefully positioned, slightly tilted to the south. You recognize it now as a primitive sundial, though the locals probably just call it the big shadow thing, or that useful rock where Marduk's pigeons poop. Here, time isn't abstract. It's about real things. How long it takes to cook a fish. How long the clay needs to bake in the sun. How much daylight you've got before the market closes. You crouch down and watch the shadow move. Not dramatically, not even quickly, but move it does. Ancient Mesopotamians didn't just measure the day, they noticed the seasons. 2. The way shadows stretched long and ghostly in winter. Stubby and sharp in summer. They weren't scientists. Exactly. But they were astonishing observers. They noticed how the shadow at noon always reached the same place on the solstice. How it grew longer day by day. Then shrank again. How the moon seemed to argue with the sun over who controlled time. Historians still debate whether they actually calculated time intervals in the way we understand them today. Some argue their sense of time was more qualitative than quantitative. When the shadow touches the bench, it's time for figs. Others believe scribes may have divided the day into fixed units far earlier than we thought. Based on sexagesimal math, groups of 60 that still linger in modern minutes and degrees. You glance at your own shadow now, tilted at a respectable angle. If this were your job, say, a temple assistant or record keeper, you'd be noting the exact spot it hits on the dial. Then you'd scurry off to tell someone important, who would then use that information to probably decide when to nap, or declare a festival, or accuse someone of being late for goat herding duty. The most fascinating thing is how intuitive it all feels. You don't need to see numbers. The light is its own language, and the shadow its ink. A scribe near the sunstone calls you over. He's inscribing wedge-like marks into a moist clay tablet. Brows furrowed in deep thought. He hands you a fresh tablet, gestures toward the shadow, and then points to a series of lines etched in concentric arcs. You realize he's trying to make a portable sundial, something you can carry and align yourself with the sun to estimate time wherever you are. Ambitious, considering you have to level it just right, face it south, and not sneeze while doing it. Still, it's impressive. You fiddle with the dial, turning it in your hand, tilting it until the shadow falls across the appropriate line. He nods approvingly. It's not quite noon, maybe an hour off, or 3, but who's counting? Suddenly a question floats into your mind. What did people do before any of this? Before sundials, before shadow sticks, before even the idea that the sun could be trusted as a cosmic wristwatch? Well, they probably guessed, or they watched animals, or they noticed when the dew dried up, when birds stopped singing, when their stomachs growled. Humans are natural timekeepers. Even without tools, we just like to have a gadget to blame when we're late. You thank the scribe, who goes back to carving cuneiform with all the intensity of someone playing Wordle with a stylus. You keep walking, eyes now more attuned to every shadow. The way your hand silhouette stretches across a sunlit wall. The flicker of a dog's tail casting long slivers on the ground. The tilt of a temple spire drawing a straight black line down the courtyard tiles. In a world without seconds, it's these tiny motions that hold the rhythm of your day. You're sent to deliver something, maybe a bundle of figs or a roll of woven linen, to a trader across town. And as you step into the full glare of the sun, you realize something. You've lost track of time again. Not in a stressful way. It just slipped through your fingers like the dust underfoot. So, naturally, you stop to check a shadow. There it is. A tall stick in a well-worn public square. No markings, no fanfare, just a single upright rod planted in a circular patch of dirt. Surrounded by faint grooves. It's the kind of thing you wouldn't look at twice if you didn't know its secret. That this humble object is one of the oldest scientific instruments in the world. The gnomon. Not exactly a word you'd have used at the time, of course. That comes later, from the Greeks, but the principle is already here. A vertical stick, aligned just so, casting a shadow that dances in slow motion as the day advances. You crouch beside it, watching. It's leaning slightly, some kid probably tripped over it, but it still does the job. The shadow points roughly westward and falls across a line etched in the ground. That means it's past midday. Though how far past is anyone's guess unless you're one of the scribes who's been tracking these things for years. You move the gnomon ever so slightly to realign it and then draw a line where the shadow falls. That's your personal mark, your contribution to the day's timeline. It won't last long, someone's goat will step on it. Or the wind will erase it, but for a moment. You're participating in an ancient ritual of observation. The sun above doesn't care. It just keeps going, moving with that regal disinterest of a deity who's seen too many fig deliveries and late priestly processions. But here on the ground, that stick gives shape to your day. The magic of the gnomon isn't in its complexity. It's in its simplicity. No gears, no weights, no moving parts, just the sun, a shadow, and a brain to notice. And once noticed, it can be measured, with time, and enough collective curiosity. Those measurements become more precise. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamians used fixed length, hours, like we do, or if their divisions changed with the seasons. The evidence suggests they divided daylight into 12 segments, which meant longer hours in summer and shorter ones in winter. A nightmare for anyone trying to catch a bus, but back then, nobody was rushing to the station. You continue walking, passing another courtyard where an apprentice priest is drawing circles in the dirt. He's got a stylus, a string, and a small crowd of curious onlookers. His goal? To create a better sundial, a more advanced version of the gnomon. With lines radiating like sunbeams. He mutters to himself as he measures the angles, sweat beading on his brow. You watch as he places a pebble where he thinks the shadow will land in an hour. He might be wrong. He might be a genius. Time will tell, literally. You're invited to help. Your job? Hold the string taut while he traces a perfect arc. It's not easy. The wind's picking up, and a passing chicken decides your foot is the ideal perch. But the line is drawn. And when the shadow falls along it later in the day, the apprentice beams like he's discovered fire. The gnomon has become more than a stick. It's a tool for thought, a prototype, a conversation with the cosmos. And suddenly, you're not just a fig delivery person. You're part of a civilization learning to tell time by watching the sky. There's even talk among the scholars that some sticks are being set at specific angles to account for the Earth's tilt, though nobody calls it that yet. They just say, the sun isn't behaving right. Fair enough. As you leave the courtyard, you see other early versions of shadow tools, a low wall with notch marks, a stepping stone path aligned with solstices, a pot whose shadow crosses a crack at noon. These aren't mass-produced gadgets. Each one is local, handcrafted, and ever so slightly inaccurate. But they're getting better. And with them, people's lives begin to shift. Tasks are scheduled, markets open and close. Religious rites begin with the longest shadow or the shortest. Entire cities begin to hum with a quiet rhythm dictated not by bells but by the angled lean of light. You pause to take a drink from a shared jug near the city gate. It's warm but welcome. The jug's shadow catches your eye, long and narrow. Pointing east now. The afternoon has truly begun. You'll need to move faster if you want to get back before the temple gate closes. Not that you can check the time. Only that your shadow is longer now than it was an hour ago. And so you walk again. Past brick homes and dusty lanes. Glancing at every upright thing, sticks, poles, statues, even your own legs, measuring time not by minutes but by motion. The sun shifts, shadows stretch, and you, too, become a kind of clock, marking your journey in slanting silhouettes. You're back at your family's courtyard now, squinting at the stone wall to judge the shadow falling from the doorway. It's a little longer than last time. That means the sun is angling westward, afternoon is sliding in. Whether or not you're ready for it. Today's big task. Organizing a list of errands passed down from someone who probably wrote it after a few too many sips of fermented date wine. It's more of a verbal list. Really, no papyrus. No handy checklist app. Just your mother reciting things rapidly while pointing in 3 different directions. Collect the oil. Ask about the goat. Return the pot. No, not that pot. The other pot. That kind of thing. Now, you could wander the city hoping to catch everyone in the right place. Or you could try and time your visits using the shadows. Because here in people don't run on minutes. They run on habits, tied closely to the sun's position. You're not expected at the oil merchants until the shadow of the gate post hits the drainpipe. It's a system that works surprisingly well, unless it's cloudy. Or unless someone moved the drainpipe. You head out, weaving through alleys still warm from the midday sun. Each errand becomes a quiet negotiation with light. You stop at a corner where a fig tree casts a shadow right onto the steps of a potter's shop. That means she's probably just finishing up the day's batch. Her hands still covered in red slip. Sure enough, she's there, humming, and not at all surprised to see you. Shadow said you'd be by soon. She teases. There's a peculiar grace to this system. No buzzers, no rush, just people learning to read time as it reveals itself. Slowly, like a shy animal stepping into view. You've got a basket now, some oil, a small clay jar, something wrapped in reed leaves that squishes when you poke it. As you walk, you glance toward the ziggurat again. The long western face is bathed in gold now, and the priest's shadows stretch across the plaza like sleepy snakes. Timekeeping wasn't just for farmers or merchants. The temples had their own reasons for tracking the day. Rituals had to be timed just so, offerings presented at sun high. Incantations whispered at shadow long. If you got the shadow wrong, you might offend a god. And if there's one thing the Mesopotamians wanted to avoid, it was an annoyed deity with thunder privileges. Inside the temple courtyard, you're waved over by a familiar figure, one of the junior temple scribes. He's got a thin slate with rough scratches and a piece of charcoal. I'm trying to calculate when to start the full moon preparation chant. He mutters, clearly annoyed that the moon refuses to operate on a 12-hour shadow cycle. Start it when your shadow disappears. You suggest. He considers it, then scribbles furiously. You may have just altered the ritual calendar by 3 days. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian religious ceremonies adhered strictly to observed time or were massaged by political convenience. It's hard to say. The lines between cosmic order and local preference were blurry, especially when shadow measurements disagreed. You exit the courtyard and walk past a household where a young girl is practicing drawing circles in the dirt. She's copying her older brother, who is determined to make the best sundial ever. His model? A bowl with markings and a tiny stick in the middle. It looks like a toy, but you recognize its potential. You remember seeing something similar before, what the future will call a scaife. A bowl-shaped sundial. It's genius. Really. The inside curve means the shadow moves more consistently, more measurably. But today, it's just a boy's experiment. You crouch down, point at the midday mark, and he beams like you've knighted him. At your next stop, the merchant greets you with a grunt. You're early, he says. You point to the shadow, but he waves you off. It's cloudy this morning. Everything's off. You both laugh. Cloudy days are shadow chaos. No one trusts the time. And schedules drift like river silt. Some say cloudy days are a sign the gods are in a bad mood. Others just say it's annoying. Still, you make the exchange, tuck the items under your arm, and glance once more at the sun, now low enough to bathe the western rooftops in amber. You know you've got maybe 2 errands left before the long shadows mean it's time to get indoors, or risk navigating by moonlight. Which no one recommends. The last delivery is to a woman who always sits out on her stoop when the fig tree's shadow touches the corner of her mat. That's her signal. Sure enough, you find her there, humming, weaving reeds, and smiling as if the universe arranged this meeting personally. Right on time, she says. And you are, not by minutes or seconds, but by shadows, habits, and the gentle choreography of sun and city. As you make your way home, the sun softens, and everything feels quieter. People wrap up their work. Chickens begin to roost. The baker throws the last embers onto the coals. And everywhere, long dark fingers stretch across the streets, reminding everyone that the day is nearly done. Shadow time isn't precise. It isn't fast, but it's enough. You managed every errand, met every person, made every trade, all guided by the angle of a shadow. You didn't need numbers. You didn't need bells. You only needed to look. And in a way, you're not just telling time. You're feeling it, through dust, sunlight, footsteps, and the comforting hush of an ancient city slowing down. Back in the temple district, your errands behind you, you pause beneath the sloping edge of a ziggurat wall. It's cooler here, shaded, and quiet, except for the faint scrape of styluses on clay and the occasional clink of bronze vessels. You're not in a rush. After all, the shadow on the far pillar hasn't reached the goat pen yet. And that's when most people begin heading home. You've got time, shadow time. Today, though, you've been invited to observe something special. The temple scribes are recalibrating their main shadow marker. It happens only once or twice a year, when the seasons turn or the shadow lengths seem off, and no one can quite agree why. A cluster of robed scribes gathers around the oldest gnomon in the city, a tall polished stone column set into a ceremonial circle of crushed limestone. It's not just a practical object, it's sacred, supposedly blessed by the high priest of Nana generations ago. Though it's also possible someone just tripped over it once and declared it holy out of embarrassment. Today's mission: realign the column based on the latest solar observations. You watch as one scribe marks where the shadow falls. Another consults a clay tablet, inscribed with last year's solstice measurements. A third squints at the sun, lips moving in what may or may not be prayer. The entire process is wonderfully imprecise, yet deeply serious. You sit cross-legged on the packed earth, feeling oddly reverent as they work. This, after all, is one of the earliest forms of scientific adjustment. They may not have words like azimuth or ecliptic, but they understand that the sun doesn't lie, though it does seem to shift its habits every few moons. Like a tricky friend, they discuss the fact that the shadow was longer than expected during last week's morning rituals. One blames a slight tilt in the gnomon. Another suggests maybe the gods have moved the heavens a hair to the left. Historians still debate whether Mesopotamian temple scribes made corrections based on real observations or simply invented new rituals to account for the inconsistencies. Honestly, both seem likely. You're handed a straight reed and asked to help trace the new baseline. You feel oddly proud, even though you've never traced anything straight in your life. The line curves a bit. No one minds. Once the realignment is agreed upon, by a show of hands and a satisfied grunt, the head scribe places a fresh offering at the gnomon's base. A cup of beer, a handful of barley, and what appears to be a small carved hedgehog. Standard divine paperwork. But this isn't just symbolic. The scribes use these shadows to schedule everything: temple maintenance, harvest festivals, purification rites. There's even a running debate about whether marriages should happen when the shadow is waxing or waning. You can't help but wonder if some poor soul was once left at the altar because of a cloudy afternoon. Next to you, a young novice whispers, "If the shadow splits in two, it's a bad omen." You glance quickly. Just one shadow. Thankfully, no need to cancel your next fig run. As the ceremony winds down, the scribes record the new shadow measurements onto fresh clay. The cuneiform symbols press deeply, permanently, into the wet surface. You lean over to peek at them. They're arranged in neat columns, one for sun height, one for shadow length, and one that's just a row of triangles. You ask what that means. The novice shrugs. Lunch. You stroll through the temple corridors, brushing your fingers against the sun-warmed bricks. A high window lets in a bright shaft of light that lands precisely on a carved niche. Every day, that light passes through at the same time, casting a beam onto the floor where a priest used to kneel. It's an accidental sundial, built into the architecture, or maybe it wasn't an accident at all. Ancient builders, after all, were surprisingly good at aligning things. Entire temples were positioned to catch the solstice sunrise or the equinox moon. Whether this was due to deep cosmological understanding or just a love of dramatic lighting remains uncertain. Probably both. You pass a storage room where large jars rest in orderly rows. One scribe once joked that you could tell the time based on the shadow of the doorway as it moved across the row of jars. When it hits the fourth jar, it's time for barley stew. He wasn't wrong. Everything, in this world, is a clock, if you know how to look. Outside again, you hear a chant begin. Low and rhythmic, it ripples from the ziggurat's upper levels. That sound means the end of the temple workday. Not because someone rang a bell, but because the shadow finally touched the designated step. That one step, worn smooth by centuries of sunlight, is the unofficial clock out point. You head back toward the residential quarter, passing the small gardens, which are half in sun and half in shade now. A farmer adjusts his irrigation channel, muttering that he'll stop when the fig tree's shadow hits the corner post. You smile. That same fig tree again. You can smell supper, lentils, maybe, or flatbread, floating on the breeze. Shadows stretch longer now, touching corners they hadn't reached in hours. The city is cooling, softening. Even now, the gnomons keep working. They point out the passage of time. Gently, patiently, never making noise. They are not demanding. They don't flash or ring. They simply lean, elongate, and disappear, just like the sun itself, which is slowly ducking toward the horizon. And you, once again, check your shadow. It's long, very long. That means the day is nearly done. You've been on time for everything. And not once did you check a watch. Only the shadows. You find yourself with a little time before the evening meal. And someone from the temple suggests something unusual. Come up to the roof tonight. You raise an eyebrow. Roofs are for drying laundry and escaping from noisy relatives. But you're intrigued. So you climb. Up narrow stone stairs. Past clay pots cooling in corners. Until finally you reach the flat top of a family dwelling. The sun has dipped low, gilding the rooftops of in soft amber. From here, the city looks ancient even in its own time. Mud brick towers, woven canopies, incense curling up from a dozen courtyards. And behind it all, the ziggurat rising like a god's stepping stone. There's a group already gathered. Not priests this time, but star watchers, Babylonian-style thinkers. They've brought tablets, styluses, a few baskets of dates, and more ambition than modesty. These people, you're told, are tracking the other kind of time, not shadow time, but stellar time. They believe, correctly, it turns out, that the movement of stars and planets can help refine shadow-based measurements. While shadows give you your day, the stars help shape your year. You sit cross-legged, a date pit in your cheek, and listen. The stars begin to pierce through the twilight. One by one, the sky is still pale violet, but already they're making notes. They speak softly about constellations, about how the moon moves slightly slower than the sun, about zones in the heavens. One of them claims he can predict eclipses. Another brags about charting Venus's last rise. You try not to yawn, but the warmth of the rooftop and the rhythmic murmur of their voices are deeply relaxing. These people are not just poets with telescopic dreams. They are early astronomers, Babylonians, Sumerians, Akkadians, who have spent lifetimes watching the night sky. They make marks in clay for every rising star, every new moon, every shift in brightness. It's a long, slow math, and you admire their dedication, especially because most of the time they're lying on rooftops squinting upward. One of them points to a constellation slowly rising over the city wall. When that star hits the temple spire, it marks the new month. You follow his finger and squint. It's a bit of guesswork, to be honest, but the idea is sound. You're witnessing the roots of celestial navigation and, in time, mechanical calendars, astrolabes, and maybe even horoscopes that blame Mercury for your mood. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian star mapping was purely practical or steeped in mysticism. The answer is probably both. In a world where time isn't a number but a feeling, stars serve both as calendar markers and cosmic metaphors. You lie back on the roof, arms tucked behind your head, and listen. One stargazer is explaining the lunar calendar, how it refuses to match the solar year, how months must be added or shaved off. The moon is a trickster, he says. You glance up. She looks pretty honest tonight, glowing calmly as the last pink light drains from the west. You start to doze a little, lulled by the warm stone beneath you and the soft rise and fall of academic bickering nearby. One voice insists the stars tell the gods' stories. Another says they are the gods. A third is just snoring gently under a shawl. Suddenly someone nudges you. Want to help with the chart? They ask, handing you a dull stylus. You blink blearily but nod. It's a simple task. Press a wedge mark next to a star name. You do it badly. No one minds. Later, the sky deepens into full velvet. The Milky Way arches above like a silver smear. And you feel, for a moment, impossibly small, but not in a scary way. In a peaceful, you are one blink in a blinking sky, kind of way. These night watchers aren't just tracking time. They're making meaning from it. Turning orbits into poetry, shadows into symmetry. Their records will last, some of them etched so clearly that millennia later, people will still decipher their patterns and marvel at how much you all managed to figure out by just lying down and looking up. A breeze flutters across the roof. Someone passes you a fig. A dog barks somewhere far below. And the scent of warm bread drifts upward from a late-night oven. And for a moment, it hits you. While most people think of time as something we follow, the Mesopotamians were trying to meet time halfway, to learn its habits, to make friends with it. You close your eyes for just a second, but that second stretches. The rooftop murmurs grow fainter. The stars blur slightly, and when you open them again, no one is tracking time. They're just enjoying it. Morning comes, and with it, another chance to wrestle with the sun. You wake on a woven mat inside a modest room, blinking up at a ceiling still tinged with the coolness of dawn. Somewhere outside, a rooster announces himself with a voice that's far too enthusiastic for this hour. You rise, stretch, and note how the sunlight has just begun to crawl across the floor, right up to the second crack in the wall's plaster. That means it's almost breakfast. Not 7:30, not quarter past, just second crack shadow. That's how your family knows when to pull the flatbread from the oven. You step out into the street, arms still heavy with sleep. As you round the corner, you see your neighbor hunched over a stone circle with a gnomon at its center. He's poking at it furiously with a stick, grumbling, "It's too fast again," he mutters. "Yesterday, the shadow hit this line before my wife even opened her eyes. Today, she's done with the bread and the shadow's still behind." You sympathize. Everyone likes to blame the sun when breakfast gets cold. But as you watch him realign his markings, scraping away the old with a flat shard of pottery, you realize something. These sundials, shadow clocks, whatever you call them, they're not fixed tools. They evolve. The people who use them are constantly adjusting, refining, nudging lines a little to the left or right depending on how their routines shift. Time here isn't rigid, it bends with you. A few blocks away, in a shaded square near the granary, a small gathering is forming. It's time for the weekly reckoning of the workers, an event where laborers are assigned shifts based on the shadow lines traced in the plaza. You've seen it before, a large circular sundial etched into the hard-packed ground. Lines extending like spokes from a center point. The granary overseer stands in the middle, watching the gnomon's shadow as it creeps toward one particular line. "That's your group," he calls out, pointing to the shadow. A handful of groaning men stand and collect their baskets. The clever part? This shadow-based system automatically rotates assignments. One week your group might work the morning shift, the next. The shadow lands on your mark in the afternoon. No written schedule, no complaints, just the impartial lean of sunlight. It's the Mesopotamian version of a rotating shift calendar. Low tech, but remarkably fair. You're not on today's list. Thankfully, you wander through the market instead, watching vendors arrange their goods according to the light. The fishmonger always sets up in the same spot, not for tradition, but because he knows the shadow of a nearby wall won't hit his stall until midday. Shadow equals heat. Heat equals spoiled fish. Simple math. You pause beside a young boy who is turning circles in the dust with a stick. He's built his own sundial, an uneven circle with irregular lines. Drawn more for fun than precision. You squat beside him. What time is it? You ask. He grins. It's time to play. Fair answer. And that's something you've noticed more and more. This society has layered time. There's temple time, for rituals, market time, for trade, family time, measured by sun patches on a wall, even nap time, which is, somehow, every afternoon just after the cat disappears under the mat. Historians still debate whether this fractured, multi-contextual timekeeping was confusing or freeing. One theory is that the lack of synchronization actually helped keep things orderly. Each person, each household, each occupation had its own rhythm. There was no pressure to conform to a single standard. Just a shared agreement that the sun moved. And everyone moved with it. You make your way to the edge of the city, where farmers are already heading back from the fields. A few hold small shadow sticks, pocket-sized gnomons. Really, nothing fancy. Just carved twigs stuck in squares of hardened clay. They use them to judge how long they've been out, how close the sun is to its peak, whether it's time to turn the oxen around. One of them stops to show you a newer tool, something called a shadow board. It's a flat piece of wood with grooves etched into it and a thin rod sticking upright from the center. See here, he says, tapping a notch. When the shadow hits this, I know it's been about 1 pot of water's time. That's when we stop and rest. He winks. Unless it's cloudy. Then we guess. You ask how accurate it is. He shrugs. Accurate enough not to die of thirst. The shadow boards, you realize, are brilliant in their simplicity. They're portable, reusable, and they allow even distant workers, those in fields or on canals, to stay oriented in time without having to run back to the temple courtyard to check a sundial. This innovation is still spreading. You're told. Some people scoff at them. Too trendy. They say, what's wrong with a good old-fashioned stick in the ground? Others are enthusiastically carving their own versions, comparing grooves, arguing over angle and depth like it's a new sport. The sun continues its climb, and you find yourself back in the city as the first bells of the temple ring, bronze discs struck with wooden mallets to mark the noon ritual. Not everyone uses them, but they echo through the city like a polite reminder. The sun is overhead. Shadows are short. Time is gently marching on. And so are you. You cross back into your neighborhood just as the fig tree's shadow retreats beneath the wall. A perfect marker. It's lunchtime. Lunch is quiet, just the way you like it. Some warm lentils, a slice of barley bread, a handful of pomegranate seeds, and the subtle satisfaction of eating at the exact moment your wall shadow kisses the corner stone. You didn't have to be called. You just knew. That's shadow time for you. Afterward, you lean against the cool bricks, watching a nearby scribe unroll a fresh slab of clay onto his writing table. He's preparing to etch what looks like a calendar. Not the kind you'll hang on a wall with pictures of heroic donkeys. This is serious lunar and solar business. He's copying it from an older tablet, worn at the edges, smudged from a generation of temple fingers. You move closer. The tablet contains symbols you recognize from your occasional time with the scribes. The marks for days, for months, for the solstices, and the equinoxes. But it's more than that. It's a kind of cosmic compromise. An attempt to get the moon and sun to agree on a schedule. Which, frankly, they never do. The lunar cycle, sacred and slippery, is about 29.5 days. That doesn't divide neatly into the solar year. So scribes fudge it. They insert an extra month every few years, an intercalary month. The ancient version of a software patch. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamians used a regular intercalation system or just eyeballed the sky and declared, looks like we're behind, throw in another month. You sit beside the scribe as he tries to reconcile one of these extra months. His brow is furrowed so tightly, you could lose a stylus in the creases. If we wait for the full moon to align with the barley planting, we're off by 8 days. He mutters, can't you just say the gods changed their minds? You suggest? He smirks. I did that last year. Got a lecture from 3 priests and a goat. The cuneiform flows steadily now. Triangles and wedges stack up like a blocky. Stubborn river. This calendar will guide farmers, traders, temple singers, and tax collectors. It has to be good enough that no one questions it, but vague enough that it can shift when necessary. You're watching the first inklings of bureaucracy emerge from clay and sunlight. The calendar's outer ring has small dots, markers for shadow measurements on key days. Solstice, equinox, planting day, rest day. You ask how they're set. He explains, almost proudly, how they use a long stone corridor in the temple complex. One that lights up fully only on 2 days a year. On those days, they recalibrate the calendar. You blink. You built an entire hallway just to catch sunlight? No, he says. The hallway came first. Then someone noticed. Of course. You stroll through the market again, passing several vendors consulting their own clay discs. Some are roughly made, with deep grooves and thumb-sized notches. Others are elegant with inscriptions circling the edge. They're personal sundials, used more for rhythm than precision. A man selling dyed wool mutters that he'll pack up when his shadow reaches the edge of his rug. A butcher swats flies with one hand while the other adjusts a stick on a board marked with sun notches. One woman has carved notches for feeding her baby goat. You ask how she knows which groove is for which meal. The loud one is the second notch. She replies, time isn't just public, it's domestic, intimate. Households carve their own rhythms. Families pass down their own markers when the shadow hits the step. The story starts when the tree's shadow touches the well. Bring the jars in. These aren't rules, they're habits, inherited like heirlooms. But as the calendar gains prominence, there's a quiet shift. Official time, the kind recorded in temple tablets, starts to rub against the soft edges of personal routines. The calendar says the market ends at this line. A merchant complains, pointing to his sundial, but my shadow says I've still got 20 figs left to sell. That tension will grow over the centuries. The slow drift from local time to official time, from community rhythm to central decree. It begins with a humble clay calendar. And you're watching it happen. You find yourself walking toward the canal where fishermen are hauling in the day's catch. One of them has tied a string to a pole at the water's edge. A small stone dangles from the string, casting a thin shadow onto a set of carved grooves in the mud. When the stone's shadow hits the fifth groove, it's too late to catch anything worth eating. He tells you. You ask what happens if it's cloudy. Then we go home and make up stories. You like this system, but not everyone is content with shadows. Some of the younger scribes are whispering about devices, new ideas, things that can measure time even when the sun's not out. Water clocks, they say, bowls that drip, time measured not by light, but by liquid. It sounds complicated. You imagine the priests reacting. Why would anyone want to tell time when the gods clearly told you to rest? Still, curiosity bubbles. The sun isn't always available. And as calendars grow more complex, some are thinking ahead. If you can measure time without the sun, you can build a system that never sleeps. But for now, the shadow still rules. You return home just as yours stretches long across the threshold, nearly reaching the base of the water jar. It's nearly evening. You've learned so much today. How people carve their days from light. How the moon throws off their math. How time itself is a negotiation. And all of it began with a stick in the ground. You're sitting on a worn stone step outside your home now, watching the shadows stretch out like lazy cats across the courtyard. The light is slanted, golden, sleepy, and though the city still hums with distant sounds, voices, sandals, braying donkeys, you know the pace is slowing. That long, familiar pause before dusk. You're not the only one who notices. Down the street, a small group is gathering in front of the temple gate. You recognize them, scribes, a few elders, and the high priest's apprentice, who always seems 2 steps behind and covered in chalk dust. They're preparing for tonight's minor ritual, one that, according to custom, must begin the moment the courtyard's western shadow touches the painted line on the temple floor. Which would be simple, if shadows ever behaved exactly as expected. But today the sun is setting behind a bit of high cloud, softening the edges of everything. The shadow takes its time. It blurs. It hovers half a finger from the painted line, teasing the group of officials who stand poised, incense in hand, unsure whether to begin. You walk over slowly, arms folded, enjoying the scene. The apprentice is panicking, pointing to a smudge on the floor. I think the line is here, he says. An elder squints. That's not the line. That's pigeon droppings. There's a small argument. You offer your 2 reeds of advice. If the gods want precision, they shouldn't have invented clouds. That earns a few chuckles. The elder nods. Let's give it a minute. This isn't unusual. In fact, it's baked into the rhythm of temple life. Shadows are both clocks and metaphors, and their unpredictability has always allowed a little breathing room for interpretation. That's part of the brilliance. Shadow time allows for consensus, for watching, for pausing. You don't obey the shadow. You collaborate with it. Eventually, the cloud thins just enough. The shadow slips forward. It grazes the painted line. The incense is lit. The chant begins. Later, someone will carve the time of the ritual into a clay record, not as a number, but as a description. Began when the shadow touched the tiger's eye stone. It might say. Or, started during the golden hue before the eastern flame was lit. Poetic time. You wonder what kind of notes your descendants will take. But not everything runs so smoothly. Earlier today, for instance, someone made a mistake. You heard about it while fetching water, apparently. The mid-morning offering was done too early. The priest claimed the shadow had already reached the threshold, but 3 scribes swore it hadn't. One even brought out a diagram. The debate got so heated someone dropped their stylus into the goat trough. There's tension now between what's written and what's seen. The priest says the gods spoke. The scribes say the sun did. You stand there thinking, in a world without clocks, authority can wobble just like a misaligned gnomon. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian power structures relied on precise timekeeping or simply used the ambiguity of shadow time to reinforce control. Was it chaos? Or cleverness? Maybe both. You reflect on the ways in which these disagreements affect daily life. In the market, for example, prices are sometimes timed. This much barley until the shadow reaches the jar. But what if someone moves the jar? What if someone builds a new wall that shifts the light? Arguments flare. Shadows become political. One merchant has started using a mobile shadow marker. He carries a flat board with lines etched and places it wherever he sets up. Standardized, he claims. Fair. Others accuse him of rigging the lines. You pass by as he's defending his board to 2 skeptical customers. I promise, it was calibrated by the head scribe himself. You're not sure if that's true, but it sounds impressive enough to win the argument. At home, your uncle is complaining again. These priests keep changing the start time for fasting. He grumbles, mouth full of dates. Yesterday they said stop eating when your shadow touches your left foot. Now it's when it touches the cooking pot. He sighs. My foot hasn't moved, but the rules have. And here's the deeper truth. Even with all the sticks and sundials, time in Mesopotamia is still subject to power, to consensus, to mood. That's not a flaw, it's a feature. This world doesn't demand exactitude. It values harmony. But people are beginning to notice the gaps. In a quiet corner of the temple, you find a young girl bent over a slab of clay. She's trying to make a personal time chart, half calendar, half diary. On one side, she lists her daily chores. On the other, she draws the position of her wall shadow when each task begins. I want to see if the chores take more time in winter. She tells you, lips pursed in concentration. You're impressed. She's discovering the elasticity of daylight hours, the way shadows change length through the year, making it hard to define a standard hour. Summer days are longer, of course, but she wants to prove it with data on clay. This, you realize, is how innovation happens, not through revolution, but through slow, curious observation. Children trying to mark their shadows, farmers inventing new sundial boards, priests adjusting rituals, all of them, unknowingly, laying the groundwork for things that one day will be called science. You walk home as dusk thickens. The fig tree's shadow has vanished completely. In its place, a gentle gray has settled over the courtyard. No more timekeeping today. The sun has retired. The shadows have gone. And so, slowly, you wake to the rhythmic murmur of early vendors and the soft thump of sandals on packed earth. A breeze drifts through the open doorway, stirring the edge of a woven mat. It's a new day, and, as usual, the sun is already working, casting long, sleepy shadows from rooftops and awnings as if stretching itself awake. Today you've agreed to help your cousin at the market. She sells dates, nuts, and, on ambitious days, dried fish from the canal. But more importantly, She is deeply obsessed with time. Not just in a, when does the market close, way. But in a, how many shadows equals a sale, kind of way. You step into her stall just as she's placing her own gnomon, a thin bronze rod mounted on a wooden disc, into its usual sunlit spot. Around it, a ring of scratch marks fans outward like the petals of a sunflower. This mark, she says, pointing, means it's time to haggle. You blink. Isn't it always time to haggle? Not if you want the good prices. Turns out, she's developed a personal system. Early morning means generous offers. People are in good moods. Shadows are long, and no one wants to argue. Midday shadows? Those are stingy hours. Too hot. Tempers flare. By late afternoon, she insists, prices swing upward again because people want to offload everything and go home. You're not sure whether this is psychology or sun science, but you admire the commitment. She's even charted customer behavior against shadow angles. You wonder briefly what kind of graph that would be. Probably beautiful, and completely unprintable in cuneiform. You settle beside her, passing nuts and wrapping dried figs while watching the shadow shift millimeter by millimeter across the etched board. Around you, other vendors glance up at the sun, down at their clay discs, and back at the customers. This is commerce, Mesopotamian style. Bartering measured not in minutes, but in shadows. A potter across the square complains loudly that his sundial is running fast. His apprentice, barely awake, points out that someone moved the awning. The shadow shifted, so did the mood. You watch them argue and think about how fragile this system can be. Light changes, surfaces warp, walls get built, trees grow. All of it affects how time is read. And yet somehow, it still works. Later in the morning, a city official strolls into the square, carrying what might be the fanciest portable sundial you've ever seen. It's a polished clay disc set into a lacquered wood base, with a slender metal spike at the center. He plants it down like he's staking a royal claim. Naturally, a crowd gathers. Temple designed, he says proudly, aligned to the main ziggurat. Your cousin scoffs. But is it accurate? He grins. Only if you believe in math. There's murmuring. Some admire it. Others mutter about overcomplication. One elderly woman says, I don't need a disc to tell me when to salt my lentils. Everyone nods as if she's just revealed a deep truth. This is where things start getting interesting. See, the more standardized the timekeeping becomes, the more personal timekeepers push back. A man next to you is carving his own marks into the temple sundial. My family eats when the shadow hits this line, he says, ignoring the angry look from the official. Historians still debate whether this push and pull between centralized and folk timekeeping ever reached a breaking point. Some suggest it laid the foundation for administrative control, for creating a state-backed calendar that smoothed over everyone's local customs. Others say shadow time simply adapted, absorbing the new methods while keeping its old soul. Your cousin decides to experiment. She adjusts her gnomon slightly, realigns her shadow board, and notes where the line hits during a busy period. We'll call this the prophet shadow, she jokes. You help her move a basket into the new light. The figs look richer in this glow, more appealing, and whether by coincidence or divine timing, someone buys 2 bundles without even haggling. She winks. Told you. As noon approaches, the shadows grow small and uncertain. They cling close to the base of every object, retreating like shy cats. Time, too, seems to pause. People wipe sweat from their foreheads. Arguments die down. The city exhales. You and your cousin share a bit of bread and sweetened water. Watching the faintest sliver of shadows slowly start growing again, stretching back out as if the sun has changed its mind. There's a kind of magic in it. You feel connected, to the light, to the people, to a rhythm older than words. You return home later with extra dates in your pouch and the faint scent of clay and figs still clinging to your tunic. Your cousin thanks you and says, come back tomorrow. We'll try mapping the early grumble hour. You grin. Another day, another experiment, another dance with the sun. And as you walk past doorways, corners, and posts, you can't help but glance down at your own shadow. Where it falls, how far it stretches, what it's trying to tell you. The heat of the afternoon settles into the city like a wool blanket. Even the shadows seem tired now, long, fuzzy, stretching lazily across walls and doorways as if reluctant to commit to any specific measurement. You're headed out to meet a friend who tends to one of the outer gardens. And he's chosen today, of all days, to experiment with shadow farming. Yes, shadow farming. You trek along a dusty path beyond the walls of past sheep bleating in half-shade and small children chasing each other between fig trees. The garden is more of a shared plot, modest, with irrigation ditches dug carefully by hand, and a curious series of upright poles set at suspiciously regular intervals. Each one is planted near a crop bed. You raise an eyebrow. Sun survey, your friend says, grinning. I'm seeing if the shadow length helps predict when to water. He points to one of the beds. That row's been getting water when the shadow reaches halfway to the irrigation channel. That row, when the shadow hits the edge of the bean patch. You look closer. The beans in the second row seem a little perkier. Or maybe you're just imagining things. Either way, your friend is onto something. Historians still debate how much agricultural planning in Mesopotamia was driven by actual measurements versus ancestral memory. But given the obsession with light and time, it's easy to imagine farmers using shadow lengths to fine-tune their watering or harvesting cycles. You help carry a water jar, noting that the sun is now sliding westward fast, casting tree branch shadows like crooked fingers across the garden path. Your friend adjusts one of the poles slightly. The solstice is coming, he mutters. Everything's a little off. You've heard this before. The solstice is shadow chaos, when everything feels close to right. But not quite. Even the scribes treat those days with caution, adding double checks to their tablets and offering extra barley to the gods. Just in case. Your friend waves you over to a little shaded area where he's etched something into a flat piece of clay. It's a chart of shadow lengths, not numbers. This is still a world that thinks in shapes and impressions, but a kind of visual diary. Thin lines mark past observations. He's trying to see if certain lengths match certain plant behaviors. You know, he says between gulps of water. I once harvested onions a full day too early because I misread a shadow. My mother didn't let me hear the end of it. The pole's shadow creeps over one of the grooves in the garden path. Time to dig. You both kneel beside a cluster of tubers. The earth's still warm but beginning to soften in the early evening air. As you work, the sun dips further, and the shadows, your guides, grow clearer and longer. When the digging's done, he points at the pole again. There, when the shadow's twice the length of the pole, we stop, no matter what. And you do. You rest, wiping your hands on your tunic, and gaze back at the city. The rooftops of gleam softly in the fading light. Smoke drifts upward from cooking fires. A dog barks lazily, then thinks better of it and flops over. Your friend hands you a wedge of dried melon. So, you think I'm mad yet? You shake your head. You're a timekeeper. He laughs. Or just a guy with too many sticks. You walk back together, talking quietly, about water clocks, those strange devices that are starting to make the rounds. About whether it's better to trust dripping bowls or sunbeams. About how annoying it is when someone moves your favorite measuring stick. Back in the city, the fig tree shadow has migrated again, slanting across the neighboring courtyard. You wonder how many people have adjusted their habits to that tree. How many stories it's silently tracked. And you think again of how seasonal shifts affect all of this. The summer solstice, just days away, is like a grand test of the system. The longest shadow at sunrise, the shortest at noon, the return of lengthening evenings. It plays tricks on daily rituals. People always forget how early it gets light now. You overheard someone yesterday mutter that they accidentally sacrificed a goat at dawn thinking it was mid-morning. The goat didn't complain. Even your cousin has noticed the difference. My fig shadow line is out of whack. She grumbled. Feels like it's cheating me out of customers. That's solstice drama for you. You head home slowly. The streets are glowing now. Dust and golden light swirling around children still playing barefoot in the shadows. The heat has finally begun to ebb. Someone pours water from a jar onto the ground to cool the air. It sizzles on the stone and smells like everything calming. And above it all, the sky is beginning its great evening stretch. The sun lowers, the gnomons tilt, the walls glow one last time. And you, timekeeper, observer, assistant to experiments and fig transactions alike, feel it. That ancient tick, that breath between hours, not measured, not forced, just followed, one step at a time, one shadow at a time. You don't plan to wander through the palace quarter, but somehow, Your feet take you there. Maybe it's curiosity. Maybe it's just the way the shadows fall this evening, pointing your path through a shaded corridor lined with baked brick walls and chiseled lions. The palace itself is quiet, with only a few guards visible at the gates, their spears catching the last rays of sunlight. You've heard stories about the way time works inside, how kings and officials measure it differently. Sometimes not at all. How the palace schedule bends to moods and politics, not sunbeams. Still, the king, whoever he is this season, relies on shadows just like everyone else. But he doesn't call it shadow time. No, in here it's royal chronomancy, or divine alignment, or some other fancy name etched into tablets and echoed by courtiers in ornate sandals. You slip past a column where a public inscription stands in the open, a calendar edict issued years ago. It's cracked, its lines worn, but still legible if you squint. It lays out the official times for festivals, tribute delivery, and monthly proclamations. One line reads, "When the great ziggurat casts its longest finger across the king's court, the harvest offering shall commence." Poetic, certainly, but your brain itches with a question. What if someone builds a wall? Or a new market stall? What happens when royal shadows don't fall where they used to? Inside a courtyard, you hear a quiet clamor. A scribe is pacing, arms flailing slightly, speaking to a bored-looking clerk seated beside a small sundial, one of those temple-designed ones. Fancy but inflexible. The shadow is too short, the scribe cries. This tablet says the ruling shall begin when it touches this point. The clerk, chewing on a date pit, shrugs. Then maybe the tablet is wrong. No tablet is wrong. The scribe snaps. Ah, bureaucracy. Where time becomes a battlefield. Historians still debate whether Mesopotamian kings understood these subtleties or simply enjoyed the illusion of controlling the sun. Some speculate that changing time, literally adjusting calendars, rituals, and festivals, was one way rulers asserted dominance. You can't argue with a man who claims the gods have altered daylight just for him. You walk a bit farther into a chamber lined with polished stone, where another court official is measuring sunbeams entering through a high slit in the wall. He's marking the beam's edge with fine chalk, adjusting a copper mirror just slightly. What's this, you ask? The light must fall on the king's step before we begin the verdict, he says solemnly. You look. A line etched on the floor, barely visible, marks where the beam should land. It's still an inch shy. And if it never lands? You ask. Then the accused gets a nap. He mutters. Time, here, is theater. Precision when it suits. Ambiguity when it benefits. It's not that the people in the palace don't understand shadow science, they do. Some of the best sundials are rumored to be buried in the archives here. But they wield time like a ceremonial sword, using shadow lines not as measurements but as performances. There's talk of inventing a permanent hour system, equal lengths, every day, year-round. You overhear this from two junior scribes arguing near the reflecting pool. The Egyptians are trying it. One whispers, water clocks, sand drips. Bah, the other says, when the sun tells time. At least the gods are involved. You walk past them, smiling to yourself. You've seen both systems now, shadow time, with its gentle sway, and the beginnings of mechanical time, cold and consistent. You suspect the future will prefer the second. But right now, in this world, shadow time still holds sway. Back outside, the palace wall casts a mighty shadow over the eastern garden. A group of musicians begins to tune their instruments, waiting for that exact moment when the shadow crosses a carved groove in the stone bench. That's the signal to play. It's not written anywhere, not ordered, just known. The music begins gently, reed flutes, a soft lyre, a drum like a heartbeat. Courtiers drift toward the sound, robes swishing, coins jingling, sandals clicking. You find a place near a pillar and let yourself rest, bathed in a haze of twilight and sound. The shadow slips further, now crossing the outer gate. You overhear someone mention a curious rumor, that the king once delayed an entire festival by 3 days because the sun refused to behave. They say he blamed a sorcerer, banished him, and built a taller tower to catch more time. Did it work? Of course not, but it gave everyone something to talk about, and something to write on tablets. Eventually, you rise and walk away from the palace. The music still floats behind you. The city is quieter now. Shadows lengthening into full-blown dusk. There's no official decree telling you when to stop. No gnomon left to consult. But your body, your instincts, your eyes, they all know. The day is winding down. And you, like the rest of are learning once more how to move with the sun, rather than against it. You wake the next day with a question in your head, not planted by dreams, but stirred by the soft dripping sound echoing from the corner of your neighbor's courtyard. Drip, drip, drip. It's not a leaky jar. It's her latest fascination, a water clock. Or at least, her approximation of one. You wander over, still yawning, and peer into the wide clay bowl. A small hole has been pricked at the bottom, and water falls slowly, rhythmically, into a second vessel below. The top bowl is marked with grooves along the inside, supposedly. Each groove equals a slice of time. When the water level reaches groove number 4, time to wake the children. You squint. How do you know how long a groove takes? She shrugs. I don't, but it feels like a good amount. Ah, precision. Still, it's oddly soothing. The gentle drop of water. The way it skips like a heartbeat across the bowl. In fact, it's kind of hypnotic. You could see yourself falling asleep to it, or losing track of an entire morning just watching it slowly drain. It's not the only water clock in town. You discover, across the plaza, one of the priests has begun experimenting with a flow basin, a carved stone trough with tiny spouts. He claims it's more consistent than shadows, especially on cloudy days or in narrow alleyways. But there's a catch. Water clocks don't work everywhere. The clay warps. The flow rate changes with the temperature. And let's not forget the goats. Goats love tipping things over. You're invited to help set up a new device. A bowl within a bowl system. A small inner cup with a tiny hole in the bottom floats inside a larger one. As the water seeps in, the little bowl eventually sinks. When it does, time's up. You test it. The bowl floats, then sinks. Then someone sneezes, bumps the table, and it resets itself completely. So, maybe not quite ready for temple rituals. Still, these early experiments are being taken seriously by some. One group of scholars has been tasked with comparing shadow time to drip time. Every morning, they set up a gnomon and a water clock side by side, marking when the shadow hits certain lines and how much water has fallen. It's not exactly exciting work. One guy fell asleep holding a stylus mid-drop count yesterday. But the goal is noble: to reconcile nature's timing with a controllable method. You start to see the appeal. A water clock doesn't depend on the sun's mood. It works at night, indoors, even underground, if you're adventurous. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamians truly embraced water clocks for regular use or saw them as clever novelties. The records are ambiguous. Some tablets praise their accuracy. Others suggest that clock drinkers, as they were called, were often late anyway. You walk through the temple archive one afternoon and pass a niche where a very large, very elaborate vessel sits, copper-lined, perfectly round, with what appear to be etched notches along the inside wall. A priest adjusts it carefully, whispering, "Let it drip like wisdom from the gods." You suppress a smile. Next to the vessel is a clay slab with wedge-shaped notes. They're recording how long it takes for the water to reach each notch. There's a lot of scratching and head shaking. One apprentice asks, "But what if it's windy?" Then time gets nervous. The priest replies, "Despite the clumsiness, something is changing. You feel it in the way people talk. In the quiet shift from asking, 'Where's the shadow now?' to, 'How many bowls did we lose before lunch?' Some are skeptical. Your cousin, still loyal to her fig shadow system, snorts, 'If I need a pot to tell me when to sell fruit, it's time to retire.' Others, like the city magistrate, are fascinated. He's begun proposing standard time units based on water flow. 'Let's divide the day into equal parts,' he says in a speech. 24 jars, each measured precisely, the same for everyone. There's polite clapping, and a lot of side glancing. Because in a world used to flexing with the sun, the idea of fixed hours sounds suspiciously rigid, like something a tax collector would love. Still, there's a growing crowd of clockmakers. They tinker, carve, test, adjust. They add weights, narrow spouts, experiment with oils instead of water. Some even whisper of sand, though that's messy. And, let's be honest, difficult to clean up. You stand in a courtyard with one of these tinkerers. He hands you a small vessel and says, "This is the future. You lift it. It's light, fragile. It leaks." You point out, "Everything leaks." He replies. That evening, as you make your way home, you notice fewer people watching the shadows. More are gathered around vessels, counting drips. There's a strange quiet to it, a kind of reverence, almost like prayer. But when you pass the temple gates, you see a familiar scribe sitting beside the old gnomon. He's watching the shadow stretch, hands folded, face calm. You stop and sit beside him. He doesn't look up. "Do the clocks bother you?" you ask. He smiles faintly. "Let them drip," he says, "but the sun never lies." And as the last light fades behind the ziggurat, casting its great long finger across the stones once more, you can't help but agree. Some things just feel truer when they come with a shadow. The following morning, you rise early, earlier than usual. The air is cool, the sky barely blue, and for the first time in weeks, a thin mist drapes the edges of the rooftops, softening every edge and smudging every shadow. It's the kind of morning that sends gnomons into hiding and water clocks into frantic overcompensation. You step outside and squint. The usual indicators, the shadow on the wall, the streak of light beneath the fig tree, the sun's climb over the east gate, are all muted. Your neighbor calls out, frustrated. "Can't even tell when to light the oven. This sky's got no spine." Welcome to the challenge of timekeeping when the light itself refuses to cooperate. But the day must go on. So you improvise. Like everyone else, you head toward the temple district, where a gathering has already formed beneath a large awning. The scribes have brought out their water clocks, arranging them like judges around a central mat. You approach, curious, and one of the older scribes beckons you over with a grin. "We're testing hybrid time today," he says. Hybrid time. You've heard whispers, an idea gaining ground among the scholars and administrators, blending sun-based time with mechanical assistance. When the sun is clear, we use the shadows, he explains. When it hides, we drip. It's a compromise, and compromises make empires function. A young assistant demonstrates by holding a short stick over a flat board. When the shadow's too weak, we check the drip basin, she says. If both agree, we proceed. If they don't, we argue, says the old scribe with a wink. They invite you to assist. You kneel beside the large drip basin, watching the tiny stream fall into a marked vessel. The drops plink like slow applause. Every time the water reaches a carved line, the scribe beside you scratches a symbol into wet clay. It's mesmerizing. Still, people miss their shadows. Down in the market, the mood is sluggish. The cloth seller complains that her shadow line vanished before I could adjust my canopy. Your cousin frowns at her fig basket, unsure when the buying window begins. "I don't trust pots," she mutters, tapping a clay clock that's half full and already tilted. And this is the other side of the transition. While hybrid time may offer solutions, it requires new habits, and humans are, historically, allergic to new habits. You walk past a baker who's stuck 2 gnomons in the ground beside his stall, hoping one might catch a usable shadow. Neither does. "Maybe if I whistle at the sun," he sighs. A few blocks away, a scholar has constructed something outrageous, a timekeeping platform, raised above the roofs. It's designed to sit above most of the morning mist. You climb the ladder with him, slowly, carefully, and find a single, elegant gnomon standing tall, proud, sharp-edged in the clean morning air. Up here, the shadow is clear as day. Down below, it's soup, he says, but time lives here. You admire it, the ingenuity, the effort, the sheer absurdity of building a tower just to see your shadow again. But then again, it works. The scholar charts the angle, makes a note, mutters about solstice drift. You glance down and wonder how many people will actually climb this rickety ladder for their time. Back on the ground, you pass a group of children drawing mock sundials in the mud. One declares, "This shadow means it's time to play." Another corrects him, "No, this shadow means it's time to argue." Fair enough. You make your way to a quiet garden behind the temple, where a scribe known for his extreme patience is arranging pebbles in concentric rings. It's a manual shadow map, one that compensates for slight shifts in the sun's angle day by day. He gestures for you to sit. "Everyone's rushing to fix time," he says, "but time isn't broken. We just expect it to stay put." You watch as he moves a small stone a few centimeters to the left. That's where the shadow fell yesterday. He says, today it falls here. Tomorrow, who knows? He's not frustrated. He's delighted. Time, to him, is a dance partner, sometimes graceful, sometimes clumsy, always changing, not a thing to conquer, but a thing to follow. Historians still puzzle over just how philosophically the Mesopotamians approached time. Were they trying to trap it? Or simply to observe it as it passed? You lie back on the garden mat, eyes drifting toward the sky, where the clouds are finally breaking apart. A slow warmth touches your cheek. The first strong ray of sunlight cuts through the mist, and suddenly, there it is, a shadow. Long, crisp, real. The scribe laughs softly. See? Time comes back when it's ready. You smile and sit up. Around you, the city begins to stir more confidently. Shadows return to walls, to flagpoles, to gnomons long waiting to serve again. Even your cousin's fig basket glows with renewed optimism. You walk past the temple again and notice something quietly wonderful. The hybrid time station still functions. But now it shares space with the old shadow markers. Neither has replaced the other. They're learning to coexist. And maybe that's the secret. Not forcing time into submission, but giving it more than one voice. Letting it drip and shine. Letting it stretch and shimmer and vanish, only to return again. Like a friend who was never really gone. The solstice has arrived. You can feel it in the air, still and warm. The kind of heat that doesn't press down but wraps around everything like old linen. The city of Ur is half awake, half celebrating, half confused, because on solstice day, shadows misbehave, and everyone knows it. You step into the main plaza early, hoping to beat the crowd. It doesn't work. Dozens have already gathered around the great gnomon, the oldest one. The ceremonial one, the one nobody touches except on days like this. It stands tall, rising from a polished stone disc so smooth you can see the ghost of your own sandals in it. The temple officials are there, of course. Scribes, curious children, a vendor selling cold date mash in little clay cups. Everyone staring at the shadow. Or rather, the lack of it. At high noon on the summer solstice, the shadow almost disappears. That's the legend, and it's true enough. When the sun climbs directly overhead, it turns even the tallest column into a faint smear, an outline that seems to vanish if you stare too long. You and your cousin sit cross-legged in the shade of a nearby pillar. She's chewing on something sweet and sticky, muttering about how, this sun doesn't care about my fig schedule. She's not wrong. The fig tree's shadow has shriveled into a vague suggestion. No help at all. The high priest steps into the center of the plaza. Everyone falls quiet. He makes a slow circuit around the gnomon, his robe stirring dust. He raises both hands toward the blank sky and begins to chant, not loud, but with the kind of voice that's used to being obeyed. And then, the shadow returns. Barely, but it's there, a sliver of gray curling away from the base. People murmur. The priest lowers his hands and nods to a waiting scribe, who records the moment with a ceremonial stylus, pressing deep, slow marks into the clay. It's a symbolic gesture. Mostly, nobody's here for the data. They're here for the feeling that even when time slips away, it comes back. Even when shadows vanish, they leave a promise behind. Later in the day, you climb to the rooftop where the star watchers gather. The heat has loosened their tongues, and stories fly fast. Of past solstices, of vanished shadows, of nights when Venus refused to rise and everyone blamed a chicken. One of them offers you a cool drink and says, you know, this is the day when the sun tells us least, and yet we listen most. That sticks with you, because it's true. Today, the tools don't work right. The shadow lengths are useless. The drip clocks falter, water evaporates faster in the heat. And still, the city runs. Meals are cooked, prayers are said, trades are made. In the absence of precision, people return to pattern, habit, intuition. The old woman who sells reeds at the canal, she leaves the dock when the heat stings her shoulder. The stonemason across the lane, he stops carving when the dust clings to his sweat. Not because a shadow said so, because his body did. You realize, the oldest timekeeper of all isn't the gnomon or the sundial. It's you. You sit back, watching the sky dim slowly. It's a longer process tonight. The sun seems to linger, reluctant to leave. You don't blame it. There's something beautiful about a city that doesn't panic when time wobbles. As twilight settles in, you hear a familiar clink. Your friend from the garden has brought his shadow sticks. He's still mapping. Still tracing, even on a day when the sun is at its most mischievous. You ask, is it still worth it? On a day like this? He smiles. Especially on a day like this. You walk the long path home through streets glowing with lantern light. The fig tree is just a dark shape now. The fig shadow schedule will resume tomorrow. Probably. Maybe. You pass the temple. A single oil lamp burns beside the gnomon. It casts a small, dancing shadow across the polished stone. Imperfect. Flickering. But still there. You stop and watch it for a moment. Not to measure it. Just to see it. Just to remember that time isn't always something to catch or command. Sometimes, it's something to sit with. To breathe in. To let wash over you like the warm air of a Mesopotamian night. And then you go inside. You lie down on your mat. Exhaling slowly. The room is dark. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks. A clay jar creaks as it cools. And above you, beyond the ceiling, the stars begin to take over. They don't care about solstice. They don't care about fig trees or shadow schedules or how many bowls of water it takes to tell the time. They just shine. You close your eyes. The day ends not with a countdown. Not with a signal. Just with stillness. And sleep. And now, as the last echoes of ancient sandals fade into the hush of your room, you let the light go completely. There are no more shadows to measure. No sticks to realign. No lines in the dirt to trace or compare. The sun has done its work. And now it rests, leaving behind only the quiet rhythm of night and the soft memory of what it touched. You feel your breath slow, sinking with the world around you, as if the air itself remembers how to count the moments between heartbeats. There is nothing urgent here, nothing to prove. The clay tablets are dry. The fires are low. Even the fig tree sleeps now. Its schedule paused in the moonlight. If you listen closely, you might hear the faintest drip, perhaps a distant water clock still doing its best. Or maybe it's just the old rhythms of time, ticking gently through the edges of your thoughts, telling you that everything continues, whether you measure it or not. Let your thoughts drift, like a reed boat in the canals of slow and unbothered, no wind pushing, no map needed, just the smooth, meandering ease of time unbound. You are safe here, you are timeless here, and as the stars wheel slowly overhead, steady and indifferent and eternal, you finally release the last threads of the day. Sleep now, without measuring. Rest, without keeping track. There's nothing left to count. Only the quiet, only the dark, only you.